Thanks for checking out the video. You're about to sit in on a Zoom meeting, a call about racial reconciliation, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, having questions and answers about historical and present day racial inequality, injustice, oppression, inside and outside the church, how it's affected individuals' lives, how it affects us. We want to be a people who reflect the glory in the kingdom of God, just as Jesus prayed, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We want to see that today, both inside and outside the church. Who else is supposed to lead racial reconciliation but a group of believers? Some of these questions and stories at times could be painful, uncomfortable to listen to hear the perspective of how behaviors, both intentional and unintentional, have affected people. And that's okay. It's okay that you're uncomfortable. We hope this is a resource to cause you to sit down, ask questions, prayerfully listen, and then walk together. The very first question that should be asked to our black brothers and sisters is, what questions should we be asking? Allow them to give insight. Allow them to help guide us. Allow us to walk together, knowing that this is going to be painful. It'll be uncomfortable at times, but we're called as believers to do this. We hope you enjoy. So let's jump in. So the passage tonight is Matthew 7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds, and to one who knocks the door is open. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will the Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Roger, would you pray for us?
Lord, we thank you for the gathering we have tonight. Thank you for the word family and the opportunity to be a part of a faith family that values these gatherings. Lord, I pray that our conversation would be glorifying of you. I pray that it would be strengthening of our bond. I pray for just a great sense of community as we learn together and as we grow together and as we go together. Lord, we're grateful for the word of God. We're thankful for the opportunity to build our lives and our church on that. Lord, will that be evident even in this conversation tonight? Thankful for Jesus. We're thankful that he died for us so we one day could be with you. Amen.
Okay, the first question tonight is this, and this is going to several people, but I'll just call on them so that we don't get confused and people talking over other people. Okay, so the first question is this. When is the first time that you understood what race you belong to? Using the term race as the social construct of race as we define it in the United States by usually color of skin, type of hair, that type of thing. So, Kiwana, when is the first time you understood your race?
Okay. So the first time that I understood my race was actually when I began to misunderstand my race, and that was in elementary school. I went to a predominantly all-black school. Basically, we had a few teachers who were white, like music teachers, librarian, a couple of subject matter teachers, but everyone else was black. And it was at that point that I was asked the question of what are you? By one of my classmates. Like, so what are you? And it was one day on the playground. And I was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, so are you white? Are you black? I'm like, I'm black, just like you. I'm like, okay. Few days later, I get another question, same thing. And then it was posed to me, well, once I said I was black, and it was like, well, wait, are you mixed? And that was the first time I'd ever heard that of mixed. Like, okay, you know what? Yeah, let's just go with that. Because once I said that, it was like I didn't receive any more questions.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, Michael, what about you?
Well, in thinking over this question this past week, it kind of some lights kind of connected for me a little bit from like a biblical perspective. So when I first understood my race, looking back on it now, so I would call it a racial catechism because the way my parents went over stuff with me, it was like, in a typical biblical catechism, you have a question and answer, right? What is our hope in life and death, etc. You answer the question, but it's like, okay, you in this scenario, okay, this is what you need to do. You in this scenario, this is what you need to do. And so me just processing that this week, that's when I recognize it. So what I call it a racial catechism. So that's what I remember.
Okay. Keisha, what about you?
My earliest memory would probably be middle school. I had a set of white friends that I hung out with, and then I had a set of black friends that I hung out with, and those two groups rarely mixed together. So I saw culture from that side and the other side as well.
Okay. Shayla.
I think for me, it was a little bit different just because I got very good at using, if you will, white socialization to get by in life. So it was really hard to feel like I was Black. Like I knew I was, and I was at home socialized in a very Black culture, and knew kind of what to do in those situations. But everywhere else, I kind of didn't need to do that. So I would say a lot of those moments really came for me right before I went to college. I participated in this program where we spent like 5 weeks on a college campus with like the top students in the state or whatever. And like, I remember being in a situation where this guy had said he wouldn't date like a Black girl because that's just not okay. And then it occurred to me like, wait a minute, like I'm barred off because of the color of my skin. And so that's one of the main remembrances I have of thinking of like, oh snap, like I am really different, and some people have a problem with that.
So you're saying it wasn't until about college?
I would say yeah, because I didn't have to think about it. The high school that I was in was pretty diverse. So I could hang out with whomever I wanted to, or not hang out with whomever I wanted to. And it wasn't, I guess some of the kids in high school, would be like, oh, you're basically like the white kids or whatever, just because I was kind of like in honors classes and that was who I was around. But other than that, that didn't really feel that major to me. It felt pretty minute, actually. So in college, moving towards that realm of my life, it kind of felt more like that. And as I started doing different things in the summer, realizing kind of how differently I was raised and how differently I saw the world just because I am a Black person.
Okay. Tim, what about you?
Just thinking over this, like Michael said, over the course of time, I remember in between, I think like kindergarten and maybe third grade, where we lived in the projects, there was a family that lived a few doors down, and at that one of the little boys, he was mixed, but we were good friends and all, but just to see that and then hear mix or just some of the terminology that was used back then that I'm not going to speak of right now was really, and I'm just trying to make sure that I know it was like in between kindergarten and third grade when I really realized that, because they would always call him the mixed kid. And it's like, what mix? And then, oh yeah, his mama's Black, his daddy's white. And, then that's kind of what I remember about it.
Wow. Henry, what about you? I know
Well,
it's different here, but. Okay.
and thank you. Well, I grew up in Zambia, so it was very uncommon, to see white people most of the time. And I came, I think, when I was in primary school. I think it was my third grade. Then in my class, we had a white boy that came, I think he's from England, I think so. And then that's when the questions started coming. And then I remember sitting up with my grandfather, asking him, why is it different from me? Why does he have that kind of hair? And why do they call him white? I think that was my first encounter. I think, yeah, pretty much. And then, of course, the second thing that happened immediately was we had what you would call mixed. Of course, there's another term that they use back home in Africa, which is not a good term. I'm not going to use that. but it's very offensive here in the US. But then I kind of questioned then what happened to him. You know, in my young mind, I think that's when those questions started asking. But luckily, I had my grandfather, who happened to be the clan leader of my family and my tribe. He explained a lot of things at a very young age to me about how God made all of us very, very, very different. So I was very, very lucky in that way. And so from that young age, I started just accepting. It didn't seem much like it's a big deal, you know. But just sometimes when people do it, then I would wonder why. Well, why do we have to put him aside? Or whenever they would exclude the guy to play soccer, I would come and tell him, come play, or else I'm not gonna play, you know, something like that. So there was no big deal for me. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's going to be interesting tonight to hear a different perspective, especially from our friend who is from Africa. So somebody who is white, when's the first time you realized what your race was? I can say, and I told Kiwana this today, it was in second grade, 1977. I remember that we grew up in South Alabama, and so our small town, little elementary school, we had to vote on class favorites. I don't recall why, but I recall you were to pick one white girl and one black girl, and one white boy and one black boy. And until I was probably in 9th or 10th grade, they continued that every year. And that's when I realized, yeah, we're two different. Like, you have to be either white or you have to be black. That's your two choices. So somebody else? I'm looking.
I'll go, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Mine was also second grade. I had two biracial friends at my elementary school. And so they thought I was biracial too. And so I would go home and ask my mom what that meant. And so I also got asked if I was Creole, because I'm from Louisiana. And so Creole is you can be mixed with different things. And I didn't know what that meant. So I just remember going home and they're like, no, you're not Creole, we're Cajun. Like, you know, it was kind of like, they were very stern with me of what I was and what I wasn't. So that's kind of my first realization of what different things meant. And so, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm looking for hands. Okay. Natasha?
Mine was in second grade, the same. I had a friend who was a little taller than me. He had big hair and he was a little darker skinned than me. And I came to school one day and a white friend told me, she's like, you know, he has a white parent and a black parent. And I was like, okay. But like, I didn't know why it mattered. I still don't, but it didn't matter then. But I remember, like, it's a very vivid conversation, and it that happened. Like, I still remember the emotions I felt that day and the confusion that I had in trying to understand why it mattered and what the difference was in that.
Good. That's good, Natasha. Okay. Here's the next question. What was the first accurate history lesson you remember learning in school about your ethnic group? First accurate history lesson. I'll start with Kawana again because you're on my screen this way.
Oh, first accurate. So I can't recall the very first time I heard an accurate, but I will say that it wasn't per se inaccurate as it was insufficient.
And how old were you when you maybe heard that?
Oh, I mean, once again, so I was in a all-black elementary school, you know, predominant middle school, all-black high school. So it was always given to us. We had lessons here and there with a little sprinkling. We got more lessons in February, Black History Month. But during the regular course of the school year, you know, you learned about your major historical figures. You know, we made sure we had that Martin Luther King Jr. report. every year. We learned the Negro National Anthem. You know, that was like part of it. You learned who wrote it, why it was written. So once again, I probably got the most during the months of February, but after that, you know, you just get sprinkles as it's important, or, you know, as you need to hit those, and as I became a history teacher, you know, as you need to hit those benchmarks that need to be hit. So there we go.
Okay, Michael?
What I would say on that is my mom is a you know, retired first grade teacher, so she was always great about, you know, reading books to me and stuff like that. But what really stands out to me as far as educational, that was really mind blowing for me, and I just think about certain scenes from it now, is you know, Roots by Alex Haley, and just going through that and having discussion with my parents, and, you know, just still vivid scenes I can remember, and, you know, from that movie today. So that was just really formative for me coming up, as far as I think an accurate history lesson.
Keisha?
I don't remember much in elementary as far as that, but middle school, we would actually have February Black History Month plays or programs, and that was started in middle school, and it went pretty much up to high school. I remember some teachers would supplement the information outside of the textbook. And usually it's just was like every year we learned about the same people. So there wasn't much variety there.
Shayla?
Honestly, I don't know that I can remember anything in school. I know that I didn't even know schools were out on Martin Luther King Jr. Day anywhere until I came to Birmingham. And I was 21 when I came here. I was 21 when I came here. So, yeah, I don't know that I've necessarily gotten a lesson. I've sought things out for myself, but never really anything like Kawana was saying. It was February, and they would kind of touch Rosa Parks, and they would touch Martin Luther King Jr. And honestly, I didn't know many other people outside of that. And so, yeah, I had to do a lot of searching for myself. I wouldn't say even in college I had, well, that's a special case. I didn't have to take history classes. I tested out. But if I would have taken history classes, I don't know that there would have necessarily been a difference or an emphasis on that, just based on where I was and what's emphasized there. So, yeah.
Tim?
You know, I've thought this through. I don't really remember anything being taught about, you know, I mean, learning anything in school. Michael said Roots was really, you know, that was my introduction, you know, really, you know, knowing about it. But to be taught in school, nah, I don't remember anything. In high school, college, like Sheila said, just kind of had to learn on your own. That was before the internet. But, you know, just, you know, after the fact of college and, you know, just, you know, learning, you know, on the internet, learning more, but there was nothing really taught per se in school. Yeah, about Black history, I'm sorry. So.
Is there anybody on here who would say that you learned about any kind of Black history other than Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and 300 different uses of the peanut? Anybody? Natasha, a little?
A little, but it came from another 5th grade student in my gifted and talented class, because we were offered the opportunity. We had to pick a topic or a subject, and she did, I still remember, like, she did a diagram. I mean, it was an elaborate. I was really impressed because mine was awful. But she gave some history on Scott Joplin, and just introduced me to the music, and it was great. But it came from another 5th grade student. That's really the only history or just, and I mean, it was part of history, right? It's just one person, but one person makes a huge difference. But in regards to the history lessons, honestly, I don't remember much about what I was taught in school, just in general.
Cheryl?
Anybody else remember a history lesson? Jen?
I feel like I remember Black history, and I remember that being part of, I think it was in high school, but I felt like it was so separate, like it didn't pertain to me. So it was like, I think I kind of checked out because I thought that was for somebody else. And it just felt very separate. Like some people celebrated it and some people embraced it, and then others, it just was very separated. So it wasn't like blended into history. I just felt like it was almost like, what's the word? Kind of like how you categorize subjects, like you have different subjects. It was almost like it was separate.
Roger?
Well, when I was in middle school, Cheryl, I was interesting because I went to a middle school where it was only 12% white. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, spending most of my time there as a child. So a lot of Hispanic, obviously, a lot of Black in my school, but I always went to public schools. And I can vividly remember in middle school, one of our coaches in Black History Month, he taught us on different athletes every day. And specifically talked about Jackie Robinson. I remember him teaching about Jackie Robinson and breaking the color barrier. I remember Jim Brown. But every day in February, he would kind of talk and teach, obviously we weren't on the weekends, but he would talk and teach us about various Black athletes and how they had an impact on history, specifically about history, not just, hey, this was a great athlete, but how they kind of impacted history. So I remember that really, really well.
That's awesome. Okay, here's the next question. Have you heard false history lessons? And if so, how do you combat those? Hey, we'll start at the bottom. Let's start on the bottom row over here. Tim Hurd.
I don't know if it's false. I don't think I've really heard of false history lessons. No, I'm just going to say no. I'm not going to elaborate on it, but.
Okay. Shayla?
Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind, and I didn't even really recognize this until maybe in the last couple of years, and it's relevant to this week, what's coming up on Friday, but the Emancipation Proclamation, we kind of all get that put in our heads. 1863, all the slaves were freed. Kind of, because if you don't know what Juneteenth is, that's this Friday on the 19th of June, is a celebration of like the last slaves being freed. Just basically, they didn't even get the memo, which is just kind of horrible. That's kind of the basic version of Juneteenth, and it's a Black holiday that celebrated, and I didn't even know about it until like the last 5 years, but it just kind of upset me because I was told over and over again, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863, but not really, because many of them still weren't freed until years later. And so that's a pretty big one where I kind of don't know why we don't bring that up, maybe because it's uncomfortable and it might bring up too many questions. But now I combat it. I wouldn't say, otherwise I didn't know, I was ignorant to it. But if I hear people saying that now, I'm like, well, actually, is what I would tell my students, like, that's true and that was a good thing, but we have to consider the fact that there were still people who were living in bondage, and it was convenient even for someone to allow them to live in bondage until they were forced to make them free. And so I would say that's probably the most inaccurate I've heard.
Keisha?
I don't have anything specific to add beyond what Shayla said. I too, like, just recently understood about Juneteenth, and it's become more celebrated. A lot of people don't celebrate July 4th because of that. That's just something I've become aware of recently as well.
So you're saying people celebrate Juneteenth and do not celebrate July 4th?
Right, I know people who do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael?
I just want to amen, first of all, everything that Shayla said, and that's exactly right. So as Shayla just discussed, I wouldn't describe it as inaccurate, but I think what Shayla just summed up is incomplete. And when you hold up the mirror to it, you say, okay, well, this is the other side of it. So he just gave you a great example with Juneteenth. So not inaccurate, but it's incomplete. It's not telling the whole story. So that's what I would say about it.
Okay. Kiwana?
So in addition to Juneteenth, so the first one that actually came to my mind was Christopher Columbus. You know, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered not America. So, you know, we all kind of grew up learning like a little tune to it and so forth. Those of us that, you know, can actually date back that far. But it's like, okay, that is total false. He did not discover America. You know, we all know that he thought that he landed someplace and didn't. So, you know, that is taught. But then, you know, for years, all through elementary school, for me, it was he discovered America. It was Columbus. Columbus discovered America. And he sailed over here with his 3 ships. He discovered America. It's like, nope, he did not. So that, I mean, that was like a big, like glaring misinformation. Lie. Just call it what it is, lie.
And I would add something to what Kiwana just said. I think we even discussed this earlier. She had brought it to my attention the other day. I think what best sums it up in one statement is in the movie Malcolm X, and he's talking, and he said, "We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us." So once again, how are you depicting this story? What side are you telling it from? It's not complete, right? And so once again, I think that kind of sums it up in a sentence.
So is there this sense that history in schools is mainly white history with a little black history thrown in February? Is that the general sense?
Yeah,
For me,
thrown in February.
Okay.
for me, it's not even black. I mean, it was very, not even thrown in February. It just, I mean, even in February, it's still not enough. I mean, history, I'm sorry, but I just get emotional with this because it's like, nobody wants to go back and then address history. All that I keep hearing is, oh, that's in the past, just forget about it. We need to move forward. We can't move forward unless we understand the past. And matter of fact, I had a conversation with a coworker about that today. And that was just, you know, well, what is it going to take to, you know, move forward? We need to forget about the past. We have to address the past in order to move forward. But nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to go through the hurt, the pain that it takes to understand what the past has built in order to move forward. So, you know, we were talking about reparations and things like that. Well, what is it going to take? It's not that you can just write a check and it's all gone. I mean, we have to understand where it all come from, so therefore we can move forward. You know, I don't know how to move forward exactly, but we have to understand where we come from in order to move forward, to know where we're going. Mm-hmm. And so history, history is history. It should be taught throughout the year. I mean, you know, Black History Month, yeah, that's good, but Black history is history. And we have to include every aspect of history in history, good, bad, and ugly. But that's the problem. America has whitewashed history and made it all clean and really good and presentable, but they don't want to talk about the ups and downs that, you know, went through it.
So what does that feel like when you're saying that, Tim, that they've whitewashed history? And what does that feel like to you? Like, what would you like for people to understand that feels like?
It hurts because, you know, growing up and then not hearing about it, but then later on in life, later on in your age, you know, researching or, you know, reading about it, it's like, I didn't know about this. I don't know, you know, why wasn't this? You know, a lot of Black people contributed a lot into society. Case in point, I was telling my coworker, I'm sorry, it wasn't my coworker, it was a friend I was talking to yesterday. Hidden Figures. That was really, we can put a man on the moon, but it took some Black women that were computers that really understood mathematics to get him there and get him back safely. Even when her counterparts, said, no, she was wrong. She was accurate. Why did it take a movie in 2016 for us to know about that? That's just one instance. And then there's so much that we don't know that is left out, that is just washed away. And we can't do that. I mean, the contribution that Black men and women offered to this country up under the situation that they endured, why should we forget that? Why should we not teach kids about that?
That's so good.
And let me just add just a little bit to that. And I'm just going to tackle it from the school teacher side, from the history school teacher side. So I get it. Being in the classroom, sometimes you can only get to so much in a given class period, and you are required to teach certain objectives to make sure that these students can apply them and make those references to whatever 9 weeks test, to whatever course of study objective test that they will be given, or benchmark test that they will be given. So I understand that part of it, but I've also seen like the standards, and throughout it, once again, it's a sprinkling. It's just a sprinkling of a little bit of Black history. Even if we're going to talk about, like right now, I'm currently teaching a world history course online, and it's just basically we talk about we discuss the continent of Africa, and then we hit on a little bit of Nelson Mandela. Now we're going to jump to some more continents, and then we're done. And then when we get to U.S. history, all right, we'll talk about a little bit of colonialism and, oh yeah, Crispus Attucks. And then we'll get into, we won't talk really much about Black people again until it's time for the Civil War portion. And then when we get to the Civil Rights portion, and, and once again, it's a sprinkling of certain people, and sometimes certain people that who can you put in maybe a good light. And it's very important. It is very interesting because last week I was actually given a call by a university official, and I will not name the university, but they want me to, she basically just called to say, hey, I want you to take a look at this course because we're getting ready to do the U.S. history course. But this part that we're doing, I just don't feel that there's enough representation. So in lieu of all the craziness that's been going on the past few weeks, it looks like that we're actually going to start rolling out a U.S. history course online, that is, that hopefully it's going to take a while, maybe in the next couple of years, that will be more reflective of African Americans in history, and not just like, oh, the triangular trade. Yeah, well, the slaves were put on the ship and they were like really uncomfortable and then they came over and blah, blah. No. So we're going to try to elongate some things with God's grace.
Yes. Amen. Okay. So some of these questions, we've asked different questions in the first 2 weeks. So some of these are just building upon those that we've talked about before. So our next question comes from week 1, and it says, what are ways that you have heard racism justified? What are ways that you've heard racism justified? Shayla, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. I think the one that I've probably heard the most is, oh, well, this was just the way I was raised. And it won't even necessarily be that the person recognizes that what they're doing is projecting racism or prejudice, which kind of flows into the same ocean, if you will, but they don't recognize even that they are presenting those things. They're just saying, well, I believe this just because that's the way I was raised, which all of us can say those things as adults, but everything that we believe that we were raised believing is not necessarily right just because that's the way we were raised. And so it's really not enough anymore just to say, well, this is what I was told my whole life. And there's actually a musical called South Pacific that has a song in it called Carefully Taught. And it's about racism. And I think that musical is from like the 1960s. And it was extremely controversial because it's a song saying that to be racist, you have to be carefully taught. And there's a lot to be said of that. And it's just not an excuse anymore, honestly.
Keisha, what about you?
Two things came to mind with this. Just people saying that mixing races, Black people are inferior in many ways, and then prone to criminality. Because they're prone to criminality, they are not worth anything, or they are worth the treatment that they receive.
So dehumanizing people, that justifies whatever racism. Okay. Michael?
Well, that's going back far. So I guess what I remember is like, especially first coming into the churches, how in the past people would try to use Genesis chapter 9, of course, verses 18 through 27 with Ham. And I think more than that, I don't know if it's so much that it's justified, but it's like it just ignored, or a blind spot is almost the response where, I didn't have slaves. I didn't do this. I haven't done certain things. So it's like, it's not a recognition that you to even look at, do you have racist potentially attitudes, beliefs, or thoughts that are influencing you that you may or may not be aware of. So no more that's justifying it, but saying, no, that's not me. Of course not. I'm good. And so I think it's more so than that, what have I experienced?
Kiwana?
Yeah, also the Bible. Yeah, I mean, once again, bringing Ham into it, Ham was cursed. And his curse was being dark. And then also, back in Ephesians, slaves, obey your masters. So, if there must be masters, there must be slaves. So, it's okay. So those would be the earliest justifications that I've heard.
Henry, what about you? You have a different perspective because you were raised in Africa and now you're here in DC. So what do you think? How have you heard people justify racism, especially in the United States?
Well, I think it's so many different angles that I've noticed. I think especially the systematic one. I think that it gets me all at the airports where they'll tell you this is random check, when actually they know what they're doing. And it can actually, I've gotten to the point where I just know where to go. I just like, you don't need to explain to me, and I noticed also that when the way the Bible was used, I mean, so many times, not only here in the US, but also in Africa, that played a very, very important, I think it created this most of the problem because it's justified very well on the pulpit. It's justified by leaders, and from the pulpit, it goes probably to your parliament or what you would call the Senate. So people take this belief and it grows. And once the leaders run with it, it's going to not only be justified, but it's going to become a belief. And that belief is so strong. I would want to use the term, it's a stronghold where people cannot really see it. You cannot see it because it's real for them. It's a belief. It becomes this falsehood that this person is inferior. It's written, my professors have studied it, people have studied for many years. You could check, it goes into sport, and it goes into so many things that I've seen still happening right now, where you feel you cannot make those decisions based on your color and because it was discovered. So there's so many people that to diffuse this, it will have to take probably the whole nation with different backgrounds. Sorry, let me go back. But I think the part that gets me the most is the use of the Bible. Let me end there.
I have a question for Henry. from an African perspective in your country, you know, or what other parts you've lived in. I have a friend who's a full-time missionary. She was in Niger for about 10 years, and she's now in Nigeria. And she was saying that in her experience, even in Africa, while it might not be the color of someone's skin, that they still have different racism, like tribal racism, you know, where they're against one another. And I mean, you know, most people have the same color skin. So do you have experience with that?
Well, I grew up pretty much in Zambia, but then I left Zambia about probably 20 years ago. I've been moving around. So, but then tribal wars, is that what you mean, or xenophobic attacks? Can I put in that context? Or is it the tribal wars you're specifically asking
I
because of
guess,
the skin color?
yeah, I mean, she was saying like variations in the color of different African skin, you know, like darker people against lighter colored, but you know, everyone's still what in America we would consider black, brown, whatever.
Oh, probably that would come in terms of, I don't know what happened in Niger or part of West Africa, but mostly what happens in Northern Africa, I know pretty much Northern Africa, between Arabs in north part of Africa or the northern part of Africa, that is where the skin problem normally you have wars with that. I noticed that that is where you have specific distinctions of where you say your skin color is different from mine, so you're inferior to me. Yeah, I've never really heard of mostly like Nigeria or any other countries, or Niger specifically on my side. I never heard of that. But in my country, pretty much they there used to be little tensions between tribes, not because based on their colors, but just based on who wants to rule, who wants to be consider themselves the strongest tribe. You know, but then those were always taken down by good policies, I would say, our leaders made, or deliberate policies they would come up with. Like, for instance, in my country, I come from a country where they have 72 tribes or ethnic groups. And then of the 72, surprisingly, we took English as our official language, but it was deliberately so that no tribe gets to own it to say we are the best, you know. And then the government allowed so many people to travel. If you wanted a job in one town, in one province where your tribe is, they will move you to another town so as to encourage mingling of people and also intermarriages. So if you go to my country, for example, right now, there's so much that you wouldn't know. People probably speak like 5 different languages at once. You wouldn't even know the difference because of those simple policies that the government. So I can only speak for my country right now. That's what I know.
Yeah, that's an example where the policies for sure helped create unity, but if not, you know, there's still the division among people, you're saying.
Yes, and these were not even policies that were even gazetted. Like, you know, it's like a bill, like it was passed. It was just leaders agreeing, you know, to say this is going to be trouble for us, you know. And then I think that from, because again here in the US, I think, I don't know how the chief, or we don't have those kind of settings up in the US, like you have the chiefs, and because those that play, or the clan leaders, those that play a very huge role when it comes to the tribes. And when they decide, or when they help, or with the education of young people, they also want for the better. They work hand in hand with the politicians to make sure that the country is still peaceful, and they understand these guidelines or policies that they come up with. If it's an education system, why they're moving somebody, you know, or why do they have to settle in a certain land? You know, they understand one another, and the chiefs also meet to talk about the safety of the country and so on.
I could learn some lessons there. Yeah, when we brought one of our kids home from Africa, he had a song that he would sing, and it only had these words: "I'm darker than you." That was his song. I'm darker than you. I'm darker than you. I'm darker than you. Until he actually met some people that Roger brought to church, and they were from Kenya, and he discovered he wasn't darker than them. And then his song ended. He's never had that song since. But okay, here's the next question. How do we lament, or as a marginalized group or with a marginalized group, without being dismissed as hopeless? How do we lament? Like, how do we allow people to lament what's going on, to be very concerned, to be very sad and just grieving about what's going on and what has gone on in the past, without being viewed as hopeless? How do we lament well with people? Shayla, you want to take that one first?
I think that the key is always to make sure that we're redirected back to the gospel and the heart of God. Like, we're having these discussions, and I think that the discussions are good for awareness. But I'm always there's kind of this little voice in my head that's a little bit skeptical about whether or not a change is actually going to happen this time, because I've had these types of conversations before. And so it's like asking yourself the question, for even if it's me thinking of someone else who's marginalized, like, do I actually lament? Does it actually grieve me the way that it grieves the Lord that this person is suffering, or they feel oppressed, or they feel like they have no identity, or they can't truly be themselves because of one thing or the other? Do I truly lament over those things? Do I really suffer because of it? Or am I just like doing my Christianly duty, sitting in a discussion and saying good things and listening and going, yeah, that sounds pretty good? Because it's very easy to go on the path of, I'm going to feel this, and now I feel very dark, and now I have to feel very lowly, and I need to tear my clothing and shave my head and grieve like in the Old Testament, and that's righteous, and all of those things are cool, but we don't have to do that. But all of those things are cool and fine to have physical representations of our grief, but ultimately, if we don't look back to the cross, it is going to be hopeless. We have to remember that Jesus said that he was going to save every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And we have to embrace that and celebrate it, and not create differences as a bad thing. The diversity that God has created in the kingdom is the most beautiful thing ever. And heaven is going to be the most beautiful thing ever. And so if we can embrace that and celebrate that now, that would be good. So yeah, we do need to lament, and we need to consider that the race relations in America still have a good bit of way to go. But right now what we're doing can either be a catalyst for that, or some people are going to stagnate and go back to the way that they were before, if we don't remember to keep looking to Jesus and asking him to be our vision, and asking him to direct us and bring those things up in our minds throughout the day, and not just saying, okay, well, it's Tuesday night, I'm on my talk, let's get everything done. We need to be thinking about those things consistently and feeling that grief and taking it to the Lord.
Tim?
I was just telling Jennifer, Shayla said everything. We can just stop it right there. No, but we've got to just give that space to admit, but we've got to come together. Just what we're doing right now is a cornerstone of where to build from, to move forward from. Just to hear what I don't know the right words to say. But I think that sharing with one another and talking and open dialogue like we're having right now, and then asking those hard questions and just really contemplating, Lord, are we looking at you, Imago Dei, or are we looking at skin color? Because I go back to Genesis. Whenever God created man, he said, let us make them in our image. So if we look at an image, if we look at a silhouette, there's no defined color. It's an image. If I have an image, it's just an image. And just because we overlay a color on top of that, that's all it is. But the image is still there. But we as people, we don't think like that, or a lot of us don't think like that. And am I looking at my brother and sister in a different context, just because they of a different shade of skin? And if so, yeah, I mean, Lord, how do I change? How do I look at my brother like I look at myself? Christ said, "Love, love your neighbor as yourself." So if I'm loving myself, if I'm an image bearer, so is every human being walking this planet, and I have to look at them as me, and that's hard to do. That's inward thinking. I mean, that's looking at my heart is deceitful and black and ugly. I know my heart. I know how it can be, but thank heavens I have a Father that loves me, that sees it and wants to cleanse me and continues to chisel me daily when it comes to that. So therefore, I can look at my brothers and sisters in a different light.
Keisha, what do you think?
I think just allow people to mourn as long as they need to. These are things that have been happening forever, and it's like it can be traumatizing. So you may numb yourself to it, and it just happens again and again. With COVID, our eyes are on it even more so. So it just compounds. Also, I'd say be genuine in your care about it, and it's for a long haul. Racism is a sin, and sin is going to be in the world until Christ returns. So just ultimately walking alongside people and being genuine in your care for them and pointing them back to Jesus.
Amen. Michael?
Yeah, I just say, amen to everything that's been said so far. And the only thing I would add to it is just, we just think back on the scriptures, right? We think about the person of Jesus Christ. He was the most hopeful person who ever lived, right? But yet we also find in the scriptures that Jesus wept. So a paradox, they both can be true. So we look at the Apostle Paul, we're not without hope. He said, I've been shipwrecked, I've been beaten. Then he said, but for this light affliction, there's a light affliction, consider the eternal glory that's set before me. So we're not without hope. Both of these things can be true at once. And one thing we've been doing lately is going through as far as lamenting, how do you lament well, is a family Bible study. It's a part of a year-long Bible study, but we're dealing with the book of Proverbs, going over friendship right now. And one of the things we've been focusing on lately is aspects of that. And I think it's helpful when speaking to how do you lament well. So first aspect we went over was constancy. Okay, are you there? Are you there for the person, right? If you want to talk about that last week, Jeff Kennard like that. Are you down like 4 flat tires, right? And then you look at transparency. So are you transparent? Are you authentic? Do you ask the question that needs to be asked? Are you scared to ask the question? And also, how do you handle these things, interactions? Or do you handle it with sensitivity and tact, knowing when to say something, how to say something? So those 3 aspects being how you can lament well. But as Christians, as Shayla kicked off, oh no, we're never without hope. We had a victory. We had ultimate hope. The game, it's already been decided. So we're not doing this without hope.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
So here's my question, because I've been told, in certain circumstances how to feel. So how does it feel, Michael, when you're in a different place? Like, you may not be in that place at the moment. We know we have hope, but you're sad and you're grieving and you're just really down by a lot of what you've seen or a lot of what you've read or a lot of what you've heard. And then somebody says, yeah, but you're a Christian and you have hope. Where does that place come in? Like, yes, I know that I have hope and I'm grieving, but I've had people come tell me how that should look.
Right. I mean, that's a great question, Jennifer. And no one, I would say, first of all, no one can tell you how that should look for you. It's different. Reminds me of David when he said he encouraged himself in the Lord. And one thing I kind of like, I've discussed with Kiwana before, and it's different for everybody. I kind of discussed it as bungee cord faith, and we're all familiar with a bungee cord. And as long as it's working properly, right, you may be falling for a long time, but eventually it's gonna what? For you, it's gonna catch it. It's gonna bring you back up. So that may be different for you than what it is for me and how we get there. But at some point with that hope we have, and that's how I encourage myself. Yeah, I may get down about something, but that bungee cord is going to kick in. I had a foundation. It's going to have to kick in. And so that's how I kind of explained it and process it with that bungee cord faith.
Okay, this is the last question before we get to a little more family time. And so this is a heavy one. Kawan, I'm going to start with you. You ready? Okay, this is exactly the way it was worded. Do you feel the white evangelical church has had an unholy silence and not spoken up enough as they did in the 1960s? And are they committing the same sin over again?
So I'm going to answer that yes and yes. So once again, we can go all the way back to, you know, the issues of the 1960s with segregation and of course, Dr. King's letter to, you know, from the Birmingham jail, and how he, and I think we tapped on this a little bit last week too, that how, you know, he wrote to the white clergy at the time. And, you know, I think Michael even posted a quote from him today that, you know, it's not, you know, what our friends said, but as much as what our friends did that we're going to remember. So if you're in a state of silence, then yes, you know, we're going to remember that silence. And also, it seems, and I don't know if it's because, you know, you got things like politics going on, or if there's just a timidity that's out there. But like Michael was just addressing Jennifer, you know, is it, are you scared? And Michael and I, we kind of talked about this earlier. You know, I would rather, if you're scared, say you're scared. And I'm going to put this as, I'm going to go ahead and code switch and say it this way. If you scared, then say you scared. Okay? All right. So if you are fearful of what someone may say to you about the position that you may take or the stance that you may take, then please be upfront with me about that. See how I code switch both of those there? You got those two? Okay. So, so once again, if you're fearful about what a person in the congregation may say, or someone leaving, should you really be concerned with that? Or should you really be concerned with what Jesus is going to say in the end? You know, good. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You know, you stood up for that sister when she needed you to stand up for her and say and be her voice that you could not be for her. You used your skin color for her advantage. You know, in that moment, you know, you took it upon yourself just to speak up. And I think we may have hit upon this last week too, or no, I heard a local minister of an African-American congregation here locally say that, you used, you know, what you had to stand up for us. Yeah.
Hey, will you real quickly, Kiwana, educate everybody on code switching? We were educated last week, but will you just educate everyone real quickly on that?
All right, so code switching is what you do, and this is largely it's African Americans, what is done basically in order to fit into the worlds and the spheres that you live in. When I come home, I speak a certain way. When I'm around friends of a certain color, I speak a certain way. When I go to work, you know, I switch the professional language comes out, the proper English and so forth. All of that comes out. But basically, you know, when I say if you scared, and say you scared, then I went ahead and I broke that down into a much more educated way of saying things. Noelle is tripping out. Yes. So I am code switching because, I mean, basically just in the Black culture, and I'll just speak for myself, I tap into so many different spheres that I have to know the language in order to be accepted in those spheres. And if I do not know the language, then I just won't be as well accepted. I'm not going to say that I will face certain consequences, although I could be shunned in certain arenas, because, you know, you could get the, oh man, well, you know, you think you're too good to hang with us like you used to, or what have you. So yeah.
Thank you, Kiwana. Okay, Michael, what about you? Do you think the white evangelical church has had an unholy silence?
Right. So like Kiwana, I would answer, you know, yes to both questions. You know, to me, it's similar when racial injustice, racialized violence is not spoken on. I saw a poll recently from Barna, and I think this may hit at the issue somewhat, not completely, you know, not completely, but there was a poll by Barna that said 60% of the white evangelical church do not believe that racism, systematic racism, is a problem. So guess what? So let's assume that's true, right? Let's assume that's true. So if that's true, guess what? If I don't think something's a problem, I'm not going to speak out on it. That's a pretty simple conclusion, right? So if I don't perceive something as be a problem, if I don't perceive that something exists, it's nothing for me to speak up for. So, I mean, we can attack this from other ways, but I mean, that's one thing that stood out to me.
Keisha, what about you?
I would say yes. And it seems like all the other, there's more sin that is talked about other than racism. Rarely do you ever hear that being addressed.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Shayla, what do you think?
I would definitely answer yes to both questions. It makes me think of, you know, there are sins of omission, and you can simply sin by not doing what you know is right to do. And I think sometimes, modern American churches in some ways might be, most of them, scared to seem too political. But justice is not just a political term. That's not just a hot, you know, a buzzword for politics. That's a word that is very close to God's heart, I would argue. And so, like Michael was saying, if it's not an issue to people, if it doesn't seem like it's that close to home, of course, it's not going to be something that you feel like you need to speak out against. And I was even seeing a pastor in Eastlake, a newer church, that was posting about going to a march on Friday and doing all these things. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, how can he do that? He's going to get in trouble. You know, that's kind of the first instinct, is you don't want to get in trouble. And it's really not about getting in trouble. I think a lot of the perspective is missing. And, you know, in James 2, it talks about the sin of partiality. And I think so many people have been taught that in Sunday school. And it's like, oh, well, don't pick a favorites in your friend group. But no, it's more than that. It's like, if everybody doesn't have a seat at the table in your mind, then there's a problem. Because Jesus went and left the 99 to save the one. And so if there are some people in your mind that you're like, well, that person, I don't know if they could have a seat at my table, or I don't know if I'd invite them in my home, then we have some issues. And I just don't think that anybody's collectively been challenging the evangelical church to do so, and to speak out against it and not be afraid of any flack that's going to come after it, if in fact their hearts are directed by God and they're seeking the Holy Spirit to show them what they should be saying and how they should act. I think so much inaction happens in the church in general that people are just scared to do anything at all because it might be the quote wrong thing, instead of seeking God and allowing him to lead them in ways that are maybe much more radical, considering that he was extremely radical when he walked on the earth.
Okay, Tim, what about you? This will be the final part before we switch into a Q&A. But do you think the white evangelical church has had an unholy silence? And do you think they're committing the same sins over and over again? We are committing those sins.
Yes and yes. Speaking of, Sheila was talking about in it, where, you know, when Christ was here, who did he hang with? You know, he wasn't just with the religious ones. He came for the ones that needed him. The one, and that's the thing, whenever Christ, just the analogy of leaving the 99 to get the one, that's where we need to go with this. And Keisha was hitting on it. We preach about more things in the church besides racism. Moses and the Cushite, whenever Jennifer and I first went to church, that was a sermon
Brick Hills.
that the pastor was talking on. So, and then, here it is, Moses, and then the Cushite was a darker skinned woman. It's like, what up? And then, I'm not a Bible scholar. Michael, you might want to jump in here. But wasn't Miriam, didn't she get, didn't something happen to lighten her skin, to kind of say, hey, what's going on here? So it kind of opened her eyes. So therefore, if we're looking at the Bible in that context and different things are popping up, why wouldn't the evangelical Christians look at it and really, going back to the lamenting, why are we committing the same, why are we going through the cycle again? How can we get out of this? What do we need to do? Kawana said, if you speak up for somebody, is somebody going to leave the church? Well, guess what? That door, it opens up. If you need to leave and go somewhere to make you feel comfortable, by all means, go to where you make you feel comfortable. But in the end, do you want your comfort to be with Christ or without Christ? So you got to look at that. If I'm not saying that that's a sin that, that's what's going to send you to hell or whatever, but you have to look at it. We have to address this. We have to look at it. We cannot be afraid to talk to it from the pulpit. And a lot are. We listened to a sermon a couple of weeks ago. Local pastor, he put it out there. He really, he put it out there. He spoke it. He really just, and I love this, like, man, you're just laying it all out there. You're not worried about what everybody else thinks. You're preaching the word. That's how it needs to be in every church. And if people don't like it, something, go. I'm not being mean, but if that doesn't fit you, then.
Well, I feel like church leadership has been very abusive in our marriage, as far as just how they directed my parents in it. They went to church leadership. It wasn't local, so I'm not calling any churches out. But, just from pastors that they trusted, that they went to and said, what do we do with this? And so I feel like church leadership was abusive in that. And then how it was cared for later, even when people saw their wrongs in it, as far as scriptures that were misused, I still feel like there was, well, that's y'all's drama. Like y'all chose this, or we're hurting with you. We're going to pray for you, but nah, that's too much for us. And so we're still going to be over here doing our thing, and y'all just keep it, calm, like, or just don't rock the boat. And so even though like some of these church leaders were like posting stuff about racism, but then how we were met with things was very different than what they're posting. And it was very confusing and conflicting. Like, okay, you're saying this, but you're not living it, and you're not addressing it. Like, it's confusing. And so, as we were talking about earlier about justifying certain things, racism, and I felt like there's certain levels justified there. Like there's something in their mind that is justified to think it's not worthy of anything else that's worthy. And so there's certain levels of what's worthy. And so that's what I see when I look at how it's justified and how it's used and abused in the church is, different churches see it as worthy. They see it as important. In other churches, like, okay, we're going to talk about these sins and that should just be combined in it, but we're not going to call out the word, or we're not going to say what we're really dealing with. And so I feel like abortion can be a very political issue, but that is addressed very boldly in the church. You know, there's other things that can also be addressed very boldly, that can also be a political divide. So why is racism met differently? Or you know, oppression or justice. I feel like we're categorizing the Black community in one people group as a whole because, oh, we don't want to be associated with the riots, or we don't want to be associated with, no, like you if you did that, you wouldn't address anything because you're not associating it the same way. Okay, I don't know what I'm saying now, but but anyway, sorry, I got on a tangent.
I think that's great. It's one of the things that Kawana and Michael, Cheryl, we were talking about, which is if you look at the screen right now, it is evident in your heart. You're looking at people who love Jesus and seek to pursue him. I mean, I'm encouraged by Roger Davis, have been for years. Becca Davis stands on stage and my heart just swells thanking God for how they minister to our faith family and the longevity of that. There is no doubt that God is stirring the heart of his people in current events. We have begged for revival, and he is laying at the feet of the church injustice, inequality, and oppression. And either we're going to say, well, we don't want revival to come that way, or we are going to march forward in this side by side, asking hard questions and taking action to say, refine us, Lord. He's refining Western Christianity. People are being called out for things that they just have bought into their whole life. And so when he prayed, you know, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is our opportunity to step forward and walk together. All right, so we're going to pause it here.